Hello my friends, welcome back for some more Oxygen Not Included tutorials. Today let's talk about how to manage water, and this is going to be something that I feel is very important for new players that are trying to get past the maybe cycle 100, cycle 200 plateau. When I was first playing this game I kind of struggled around that plateau a lot, and I think a lot of it came down to my ability to reproduce water so that I could use it for the various things that I need. So this is going to be talking about how to do that, and I am doing this on a normal map. We are going to be using some sandbox mode stuff though, so let me go ahead and turn that on really fast. But the whole idea here is to do it here so that it's a little bit more understandable in the context of a real game. And we'll just kind of walk through the beginning portions and how you should be expecting to manage your water all the way through until when you're fully sustainable. So this may be kind of a long segment, might be kind of a longer video, but we're just going to kind of plow through it and get done what we need to get done. So here we go. So if you're first starting out, the first thing you always want to do, start digging and start building some bathrooms for yourself. And I am going to kind of speed run through this part because there are plenty of other places where we talk about this kind of stuff. But let's say we do something like this. We'll throw down a few outhouses. Those are the first things that we want to do. Already this is pretty important because one of the first things that I'm going to want to do is conserve my water as much as I possibly can. And this can be both conserving it in the sense of just not spending it, but also making it so that you don't have to refine it or spend any extra time managing it. Early in the game here, it's very important to spend your time as economically as possible. So these outhouses right here, I'm going to stay on these for a really long time. All the way up until I can have plumbed bathrooms up, and I will not get plumbed bathrooms up until I can already reproduce my water. This may be something that not everybody agrees with, but I feel very strongly about it only because, as a newer player, there's so many different things that could pull your attention in different directions that keeping it simple is one of the easiest ways to succeed. So what I would normally do by this phase is we need to get power and stuff like that up, so I'm going to just enter the sandbox mode so that we can get this stuff done faster. I would start adding power, I would start adding some oxygen here, and I would start adding a research station, which we're going to do here. We also need a battery in order to store it, which, kind of distracting myself. We'll go ahead and grab a battery. Just a small one for the time being, and then just wire it all up. Now this is the second important part, is because oxygen is going to be something you always need to reproduce. And rather than rushing into a source that requires water, I want to stay on this algae for as long as I can. This is also going to mean that the number of dupes that I take on needs to be pretty low for the first little while. I would honestly say anything less than 10 before you can start replacing your water renewably is what I would stay around. So I would say do not mess around too much with adding anything that's going to consume water until you're sure that you can reproduce it. However, this research station is going to be something you need to start getting into your other tech. And one of the first bits of tech you want to get into that I always talk about is this food stuff. So I'm just going to go ahead and start researching that. Duplicants will get on it, and we might rush it and cheat a little bit, but to get your research done, that's just going to take dirt, and that's fine. Once you get advanced research, that will take water. So when you get to that point, you probably want to start building down to one of your water pits. Let me turn on the cheater mode to get this all done a little bit faster. There we go. So you want to dig down to one of your water pits, and the water pits are going to be something that you probably just want to leave where they are. What I'll see a lot of people doing, and I used to do this myself a lot, is they'll start like building tiles and trying to capture it themselves or trying to move it around. Just don't waste your time on this. I don't think this is worthwhile, and I talk about this a little bit in my top 10 tips video. But the whole idea of this starting pool is to basically just work around it. If you need to dig around it and underneath it, make sure to at least leave a little bit of space so that you don't wind up draining it in a direction you don't mean to. So if I were to do something like this, let me dig this out first. I'm going to leave a couple of spaces here on the side just to make sure that the weaker tiles don't wind up leaking like this fertilizer. And if I'm ever digging underneath it, I also need to make sure to leave a couple of tiles like this. You also do need to make sure to not dig out anything that's going to make it fall, because when you dig out sand, or at least underneath sand, it will fall. So let me find a good pocket of sand to demonstrate this. So if I were to dig like right here, that'll dig this out, but as soon as I do, all this sand's going to fall down. And if there was water on top of this, that would cause a huge flood. You'd have to deal with that for quite a while. So at least for the time being, we will drain this pool of water eventually, but just don't spend time investing in trying to get this thing perfect. Just kind of do your best to work around it for the time being. So if this were my base that I was starting on, I would just give my duplicants some paths to work around. I'd probably dig down something like this so that I could make ladders and dig wide enough to give myself a good amount of ventilation. Build some ladders through here as well. Something like that. And digging around is going to be very, very important throughout the game. It's going to be something I hammer on over and over and over. So let's talk about the advanced research stuff. So eventually we will get our food up. That's going to be one of the first things that we want to deal with. And then we also want to get onto this advanced research right afterward. This advanced research is going to be the first point in which we actually need to start spending water. So we will go ahead and drop a research station here. Let me clear all these notifications that I have new stuff, just so they're not in our way. I think that's it. No, I must have missed one. Well, oh, here we go. Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and clear these alerts, but this is the first time we actually need to spend water. So the thing that you want to place to actually grab the water is one of these pitcher pumps. You can drop it something like this. That'll be so that you can actually run water to your research station, which is something you can't avoid. So this should be the first thing that you're spending water on, is this supercomputer. The other things that you'll need to worry about by this point is you'll probably need to start worrying about replacing your food, which we did just research, and I'm going to start dropping some of these farm tiles. Something like that. What I'm going to plant in these farm tiles is I'm going to plant this mealwood, and I'm going to stay on this mealwood for as long as I possibly can. The way that I need to get more mealwood seeds, by the way, is I want to dig into here as far as I can. You want to aggressively dig so you can find some more of these seeds. You can dig upwards as well, something like this. And dig out extra paths like that. You want to dig around as much as you possibly can to find extra seeds, because that's what's going to allow you to plant enough food to keep your duplicants living. This is very important as well, and this kind of puts a clock on two things that you are using to survive. One of them is algae, because we're still using the algae to produce oxygen, so that's one reason to keep digging as well, because there's a ton here, a bunch here, here. Once you get into these outer biomes, there's a lot. There's a big patch right here. And dirt as well is going to be the other thing. So I will usually open this up to keep an eye on the total number of dirt that I have and algae, and make sure that I understand how much of that I have, so that I know when it's right to transition off of those things. Because water is going to be the long-term replacement for both the food that you grow and the air that you breathe. But we need to make sure that it's renewable before we just go and start spending it all and run out and die. So let's talk about other ways to conserve food. Once you get this meal lice going from your meal wood, you will want to, or you might want to, do something like this, where you drop a microbe musher and you're like, okay, cool. Let's start making better food. Oh yeah. Let's go in here and let's start maybe making some mush bars and making some lice loaf. I would not recommend this at all. I'm going to be very clear, do not do this. This is a huge waste of resources, and they're vital resources that you're going to need to live throughout the mid-game. Mush bars in particular, this takes a ton of dirt and a ton of water, both of which are something you cannot afford to just throw away. Lice loaf as well takes a lot of water, so do not mess around with these. Your only food source, and I should just destroy this right now to make a point, your only food source should be these raw meal lice as much as you can possibly afford. I would also continue to urge you over and over and over, I'm going to say this, keep digging around, dig up any natural plants that you might see, like this mealwood, because it's going to grow faster when it's domesticated as opposed to just growing naturally. You can also dig around to find a bunch of these buried muck roots that will help you at least throughout the early game. But yeah, just keep getting out on the map. Keep going out as far as you can possibly get. As soon as you can reveal stuff, you'll start hitting walls in which you can't actually dig through because your duplicants don't have the skills to do that. So make sure to keep up on your skills. Keep assigning duplicants to skills that will get you out further along the map. And just keep going. Like, one of these dupes being assigned to mining is going to be what you're going to want to use to get out on the map, find as much as you possibly can, so that you can see what's going on. Let's see. Looking at my notes here. Yes, another thing to pay attention to is when you're growing food, you want to limit the amount of waste that you generate. So what I mean by that is when you grow food, if you were just to grow an absurd amount of food all right off the bat, the problem with that is that you could start wasting food. And what that means is you're effectively using dirt to go into food to then just have it totally go away. that is not good at all. You want to make sure you're keeping a close count on your calories. You want to build sustainable systems to store your food so that you're not wasting it. Something like this, which is what I'm doing now, so that you can have your food last longer than it otherwise would. And then you can set this to all. This will help it sustain a little bit more because carbon dioxide will collect. If you really feel passionate about it, you can build a refrigerator. You can find some other cooling solutions to keep your food well maintained over time, but conserving your food and making sure you're only producing as much as you need is very, very important. So make sure you're keeping up on that as well. Eventually what's going to happen is your dirt is going to start running a little bit low. This may not happen for quite a while, and it's good if you can wait until then, but you want to make sure that you know when that's happening. You want to get a good idea of how much dirt you're spending per day, and once you get down to maybe 15-ish tons of dirt, if you're not finding any more as you dig out on the map, we don't want to necessarily recreate dirt. By this point, it's probably okay to switch on to blossoms, and that's for a couple of reasons. One is because reproducing dirt is going to be very time-consuming and expensive, especially on maps where pips don't spawn naturally. That can be really hard to come by. But the other part is this is going to be where you're going to want to think about replacing your water. So eventually we'll get to a point where we need to get off of our dirt. Say we don't have that much. We'll drop a bunch of these hydroponic farm tiles like that. And then we'll drop some tiles above, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we'll drop it something like this. We'll put some furniture, or sorry, some light bulbs up here so that we can light our Bristle Blossoms. You can also capture these shine bugs, but they might eat your food. I don't know. I find them to be really annoying. And we're going to hook this up to power. And by now, if we've been digging around the map quite a bit, we should have found a handful of blossom seeds. We only have one right now. This map is actually pretty interesting of how little it's giving me. You can still continue to dig around. Any buried object, especially in the starting biome, could be seeds that you could be using, so I can't stress this enough. Continue to dig. But let's say we get a bunch of seeds. Let me just spawn some just because we're some dirty cheaters here. There we go. So now we're going to get to a point... Well, sand just buried a bunch of stuff. Now we're going to get to a point where it makes sense for us to start running off of blossoms because our dirt's getting low and we need to keep up on our food. So let's go ahead and plant them like that. And what we need for these tiles is we definitely need to route water in here automatically so our dupes don't have to carry water one by one to water these plants. So we will get on our plumbing. We'll drop a liquid pump. We'll pipe it something like this, and I do encourage you to pipe it all the way across the top like this, and then just draw them one at a time down in each of them. There's a handful of reasons, one of which is because this is going to be one of the better ways to cool the area that this is growing in if you have colder water. But also it can prevent some plumbing issues, so it's just better to do it that way in my opinion. I'm also going to spawn a little cheater power generator for us, so we don't need to worry about this anymore. Alright, so we're going to hook this up to plumbing. Our seeds are getting planted, they are lit, they are getting water coming in, and now we're growing Bristle Blossoms. Now this puts another tax on us. This is effectively our new clock. If we're not on dirt anymore because we've decided to dig all this stuff up and we can produce food from something else, now we're on a clock in terms of water. We need to make sure that we know how and where we can replace this water. And I'm just going to push on this again. I know you guys are going to get really annoyed with me, but you need to dig. And this is going to be exactly the point why this is going to start mattering. What you're going to find when you dig out there is you're going to find two things that are really, really important. One of which are these ice biomes. You can see them every once in a while. There's one here, one here. I've only dug out so far, or at least revealed so far. These are going to be where we're going to start planning where to actually put all of our water refinement systems. The second thing that's interesting to find and important to find are things like this that produce water, like this saltwater geyser. There could be some also buried. So if you see any spots where there's like 4 neutronium tiles in a row, that likely means that there's a geyser or something behind there that could be really useful, and especially for water. So let's just go ahead and see what this is. I'm going to select the emergency priority. I'm going to highlight this, and that'll tell me without digging it out what this actually is. This is a cool steam vent. This will produce water, but it's a little bit more maintenance than it's worth, so I'm going to try to leave it alone if I can for right now. There are a lot of runs where you will see revealed cool steam vents like this. And yes, this produces water, but it's kind of a pain in the butt. I would try to find something else. If you can find one of these saltwater geysers or regular water geyser or polluted water or something like that, that's going to be a lot more handy. There's a couple over here. Let's just see what these are really fast. So one's a gold volcano, one's a hydrogen vent. So neither of those are very useful. So you just want to dig around until you find something. This saltwater geyser is good enough for right now, though. This is at least going to produce something that can be renewable water for us. However, what you might notice is that if you click on one of these geysers, you might notice that this comes out at 203 degrees Fahrenheit. This is like 97 degrees Celsius. This is ridiculously hot to the point that it's almost boiling. And this is a big problem. You shouldn't be circulating this around your base because it's so hot, but also because if you click on one of these plants, these can only handle a certain temperature range, and I like to think about this as roughly like room temperature down to about like right before freezing is about where these things land. If you can generate water in between there, then that's great, but if I try to feed 200-degree water to this is just not going to grow. All my food's going to die, and it's going to be game over because I have no dirt and I have no water anymore that I can use to feed my plants. So now we need to figure out, okay, how do we take this and how do we make this cool so we can continue to feed our blossoms? And that's, again, why digging is very, very important. So if I were to dig out to this ice biome, let's see if we can find anything else that's a little bit closer just to make this a little bit more convenient for us. Reveal a bunch more stuff. All right, here's a small ice biome here, maybe a little bit too small. Some more stuff over here. Here's another ice biome up here. We want to settle eventually on one ice biome, and they may be far from your only producing geyser. Here's another thing, by the way. What are you? That's a Liku oil fissure. Definitely not something that we can use. So what you might wind up doing is you might wind up saying, all right, I just need to settle my water somewhere, and I want to settle my water somewhere that's kind of away from my base, because this is something that once I set it up once, I'm not really going to do that much with it. Also, how did this side get revealed? That's pretty weird. Also, the other thing to think about is I need to settle near to one of these ice biomes because a very simple solution for this is that ice plus cold water, or sorry, ice plus warm water equals cold water. You'll melt the ice, that'll generate more cold water, and that'll be cold enough to feed your blossoms. So that's definitely your next goal here, is replacing that water that you're using for your blossoms. We could settle right here. There's not a ton of ice. I would probably opt to settle a little bit more maybe up here. So just for the sake of it, and because it's further away from like the center of my base, I'm just going to go ahead and delete a big block of it, and we're going to settle there. So let's say we were to dig out something like this. This is probably a little bit too big, but that's okay. What I would do is once I get close to one of these ice biomes, by the way, here's an anti-entropy thermal nullifier. These are not great, by the way, if you wind up seeing any of those. Again, we're also still staying on our algae as long as we possibly can, so digging into these areas can be very important. Also, digging into these areas can be very important because it'll give you slime. Slime will slowly produce oxygen as well, and they do produce a little bit of germs, but you can definitely take care of this by dropping some storage bins like this or something like that, researching the deodorizers and doing this, and then just having these ask for slime on a regular basis. So if I were to dig out something like this, and then just say, oh, okay, give me this slime, give it to me on a pretty high priority, then at that point, you can definitely get some more oxygen production off of that, minimize disease, and you're good to go. Plus, you're also grabbing algae every once in a while. I would not worry too much about refining this slime into usable algae via one of these buildings. This is going to take a lot of power and a lot of time and a lot of heat, whereas the slime is already giving you free oxygen anyway, so I just leave it alone. All right, anyway, so back to what we were focusing on. We're going to focus on grabbing big patches of ice. So, oh, this is going to be rake. Let's go ahead and delete this. What I would do is I would start building out areas that we're going to manage our water. What I like to do is I like to think about 3 different tanks or more, depending on how you want to set this up. And I'm going to set this up in a very robust way. You don't have to copy this exactly, but I'm going to explain why I'm doing things in certain ways. So I'll build maybe a ladder or something here. I'm going to put a pool here that is going to be intended to put ice into. So this is going to be filled with water and ice. I'm just going to space this out like I always do, just for the sake of my own OCD. So there we go. Going to go ahead and destroy this. So this pool of water is going to be exclusively for cooling water. So I'm going to have something like this, and I'm going to have a ladder leading down into it. And also it's going to be next to an ice biome so that if I need more ice, I can just jump in there whenever I want to I would normally create an entrance that looks a little bit like this, kind of insulated. It's not going to do the most perfect job, but, you know, it's good enough. And then I'm going to want... Oh, I need to actually connect this to my regular base, so let's go ahead and do that. By the way, we'll talk about these other pools of water here in just a little bit, because they can be a useful source of water, but you want it to be as renewable as possible, and you don't want to be spending too much time going and digging out each individual one. But there's some tricks that we have there, so we'll worry about that in a bit. So, when I need to get ice, what I will want to do is I will want to drop a handful of storage bins like this. The number can be varied. You can also manage this in a bunch of different ways, so, you know, that number was not anything special. Just a number that I came up with. And then once I start digging in here, like that, and that will start dropping ice on the ground. So you'll get these blocks of ice that are like this. When you want to run them into these storage bins, you want to very critically make it so that these storage bins are not accepting 20 tons of ice, because that will take forever to melt, and when it finally does, that'll produce 20 tons of water, which is effectively 20 tiles of water. That's way too much. So I want to accept these at about 1,000 kilograms per box, and you can use some other stuff to help it melt a little bit faster if you have the research for it. One of which would be these smart storage bins that would help conduct it a little bit faster, but it's not too big of a deal. I would just build these probably out of something that conducts pretty well on its own, like sandstone, granite's pretty good, something like that. And then what we want to do is we want to accept this liquefiable and accept ice. You can accept crushed ice if you happen to find it. You can accept snow. Do not accept polluted ice for what it's worth. That will just produce polluted water. We don't want that. So I'm going to have this request to get a pretty high priority. This is also why suppliers can be kind of important. And if I'm going to continue digging in here, notice that I'm digging in at kind of the bottom of the biome, so that if I dig upward, I'm just going to use ladders to both dig on and to walk on. So if I were to do something like this, I would probably use a ladder above this, so that if I dig out any extra ice, it just falls back down to a point that's already close to the door. So if I were to do something like this, being a little bit messy because we're going fast, but, you know, whatever. All that stuff is going to fall down into one central place so that I can run it from here to here and get water out of it. Now, of course, the step that I skipped is that we need to be filling this with water anyway. That's going to necessitate a couple of extra tanks of water. And I'll explain both of them as we go on. One of which is going to be a tank of water that we build that is intended to hold warm water. It can be germy or it cannot. The other one will be intentionally germy. So you could build 2 tanks, something like this. Have a place to get in and out just to maintain it if you need to. And I'm going to build a couple of doors on the bottom of this. These are going to be these mechanized airlocks. I'm also going to build something here, which we'll talk about in just a bit. And then for these, if I want to have entrances to this, you can just do something like this. And these 2 tanks of water are going to hold 2 different types. Like I said, they're probably going to be very warm or hot water. One of them should be without germs entirely. One of them, it's okay if it has germs. And the reason you would get germs is if you started hooking up actually plumbed bathrooms, because that's effectively going to be another water source, which we'll talk about. But yeah, you want to set up something like this for each of these doors. And also, I should mention that there's a bunch of different ways to set this up. I'm just doing this in the cheapest, most manual way possible. So this is not a, like, declaration of this being the best possible way to do it, but it just at least gets you thinking about the right solution. So these are accepting ice. We're going to start filling these tanks with water that we get from around the map. And these tanks need to be filled with renewable water very critically. So let's go back down to this saltwater geyser, and this is something that's producing water for us, so let's go ahead and capture it. So what I would do around this is I would dig out a little bit of space. I would drop some insulated tiles. Probably want to use something better than sandstone, by the way. I'm getting a little bit lazy about that. Let's try to build them out of, like, sedimentary rock or obsidian, if we can find that. And I would build something that looks a little bit like this. Maybe one more space over, because I miscalculated. What I want to do here when I'm capturing this... I'll just go ahead and close this all off for now. What I want to do when I'm capturing this is I want to put in a pump like that. And then I want to put in some automation, which has a hydro sensor and a wire to wire the 2 up. You obviously need the pipes and the power and all that stuff, which we'll worry about in a bit. And I'm going to go ahead and start wiring that up now, actually. Now that it's on my mind. I'm going to be digging around some of these pools. I'm just going to delete these since we haven't talked about them yet. But once we get everything hooked up, You're going to set this up so that the hydro sensor is only detecting for a certain amount of water being on this tile. Let's say above 100 kilograms. That will make it so that we're only pumping water out of this when we know we have a sufficient amount, and we're not spending power just pumping this out. Oh, by the way, this is important that this is showing up. My pump is overheating. We want to use something that can resist the heat. So you want to build this out of gold amalgam if you can possibly get it. Or steel, but gold works just fine as well. Okay, so now we have it set up to only pump out if we're getting enough in this actual chamber. And this chamber is closed off so that we prevent as much heat transfer as possible. You can make it as small as you can possibly get it so you can build around it conveniently. All that stuff is pretty important. So now we have salt water. Let's go ahead and run a pump or a pipe up here. Let's make sure we're getting kind of close. We'll dig down a little bit, maybe over, sure, whatever. Like I said, we're being a little sloppy because we're going fast, but we'll make sure that it at least still functions in the way we expect it to. There we go. All right, so we've got a pump. We've got a pipe coming up here. You definitely don't want it to intersect with any other water sources, so definitely build bridges and stuff to get it out of the way. Also, something to think about here that I'm doing a bad job of is this is 200-degree water. We should probably insulate these pipes so that it doesn't overheat our base too badly. So let me go ahead and rebuild this really quick, which it doesn't do in sandbox mode, ironically enough. So let's go back and delete this real quick. Which we will get to. We'll replace all this stuff. Deconstruct. Okay, so now we should probably put in insulated pipe because this is going to be very hot. Let's pump this up here, over, up. The liquid bridges, you can try to use something that will not conduct heat super well. Igneous Rock is okay for these, or if you have ceramic, that works out really well too. Pump this all the way up. Keep going until we reach our point that we need to for water refinements. We probably could have hooked this up a little bit better, but you know what? We're just being sloppy for right now. So, we've got a pipe up here. Let's go ahead and run some wire down so that we have power. Making a lot of noise. And we'll close this back off. Alright, so we have a pump that is powered. It's waiting to be filled up with water. You might already have a whole bunch built up there already, and that's totally fine. Now we need to have a place to potentially collect a lot of this before we refine it. So you can do this one of two ways. One way is you could build an extra section here that looks, you know, something like this. That is for storing water that comes from various sources. You could put a whole bunch of them in there. You don't have to do it exactly this way, but yeah, just giving you guys some ideas. So what you can do is you can either dump it into a big pool like this, and you can store your salt water that you have expecting to be refined just in a tank. Or you can use a bunch of these liquid reservoirs and you can drop them down like this. This will be a little bit more power efficient if you do it this way, but it does take more metal and a little bit longer to set up. You also could store it on location. So if you wanted to do something like this, you could go like that. We'll destroy all this water just to get it out of the way. Again, we're speed running a lot of this. And you could instead just put a few tanks on top of here so that you have some kind of buffer room. So that if any of this gets backed up for any reason, that you're not just letting salt water not spawn. Because eventually this will get clogged up and not be able to produce anymore, and you don't want to mess around with that. So maybe we'll do something like this where we drop it all in here first, we route it back out, and back up into the main line. Like that. So that if this ever does overflow or you have more water than you can process right now, this will just store it on locations. Okay, we now know that we have two places that could potentially store salt water. It could be stored in these tanks down here, and it could eventually run off into a tank here. I'm just going to leave them both up for right now because it's not too big of a deal. But the whole point is that you need some kind of backup storage for the different sources of water that you might get. And specifically, you need to store based on water type. So that would be either water or salt water or polluted water. Regular water you can also store here if you want to, if it comes from like a cool steam vent or a regular water geyser or something like that. You may also need to store water dependent on if it has germs or not. So keep all that stuff separated, but the ultimate idea is to eventually funnel it down into these tanks here, which will eventually funnel into a tank here, which will eventually funnel into another tank, which we're about to show, which is basically water that's done. Like, it's water that has been cooled and that we know we can feed to our blossoms. So that's what this tank is going to be for before we finally pump it out. And by the way, you could use pumps to move it between these tanks. I'm just using doors because it's easier to open and close them and just flood the whole thing all at once. So you can do that either way. But yeah, so those are effectively what we'll have set up here. For the salt water, we know that salt water is going to be in this tank, so we would put another pump maybe on the end here, something like that. Then we would need to refine it into something we could actually use. So we'll put a desalinator down. We'll hook up the pipes here real quick. Again, we're going to use insulated pipes because this is very hot. And now we know we have refined water coming in here that will not have germs. I guess I can't really say clean because that doesn't tell you if it's germs or not. It's always really weird for me to describe that. So yeah, you already have, or now we have a system that goes from salt water all the way up into clean hot water by now. Let me hook up some power that's on a separate grid here just so that we can continue to speed run this. You don't need to power these doors, by the way. They will open and close if you just flip the switch, which is why I have it like that. So for salt water, let's just get this thing going. Let's just pretend that we already have all this stuff set up. We still need power in here because I messed it up when I rebuilt. So let me just sample this really fast. We'll set up some salt water, brush it in, and there we go. This should be like, oh, there's enough salt water here now because 800 is clearly greater than 100. So we're going to start pumping hot salt water up here. It's going to be at, again, that like 200-ish degree area. Comes out at 203, but it may be cooled a little bit by the tiles or whatever else might have already been in there. So yeah, we're pumping it up. It's eventually going to wind up here. So let's just kind of speed this up a little bit so we can see all this stuff happening. I have this on super duper speed, so you should see stuff come flowing up here pretty quickly. Even on super duper speed, it's still pretty slow, but all right, there we go. So we got water flowing up here, and here it comes. We're going to start pumping it into our desalinator, and that's going to start going into our other tank that is filling up with clean, refined, whatever you want to call it, hot water. By the way, we should probably make an area for them to walk. So once we have this, let's just pretend this goes along for a little while. Let me sample this and fill this up as if we've been running this for a little bit. Brush this in like that. And it's being refined down here, pumping in. There we go. We're going to sample this and create a big batch of water that was effectively created from this saltwater geyser in a roundabout way. Oh, I need to increase the amount. So let's say we got something like this going on. Let's say it's pretty full. You could also build this on automation as well to make sure you don't overfill it, or you could build it like a tile down so that it overpressurizes. Let's say we got a full tank of water here. This is all really hot. We've also been collecting ice in the meantime, so we've got a whole bunch of ice here in smaller quantities in separate boxes, so they'll all get faster heat exchange and they'll melt quicker. So let's go ahead and open this door, which is going to dump all of our hot water down into the ice. And then the ice is going to gradually lose temperature as more and more water floods in here. You could also make these tanks bigger or smaller, by the way. There's also going to be a second tank that we're going to fill up, so we'll pay attention to that in a little bit. But the point being, if we're going to go on to super speed here, watch how fast the ice will melt. This will take maybe a handful of cycles before you get your first batch. But this water is going from 173, and it should drop down to a point where we can use it not super quick. It's going to take a handful of cycles, but it will happen. And once it does, hopefully we've done it fast enough so that we can stop relying on this. We can even just pretend that this has all been used up. So let's do that really fast. Let's fill this up. Let's say we've used all of this water, and let's say that this water is really running out. Like we're down to here maybe. Meaning that if this is our timer to death, then we're getting pretty close. So we're desperately trying to melt some ice to get some colder water. Put this back on super speed. And eventually what should happen is this will dissipate, it will turn into cold water, it'll mix with the hot water, and it will result in cooler water. This may take a few batches, especially if you're starting with water that is very hot. If you can afford it and try to find a polluted water geyser or something like that that comes out a lot colder, that'll definitely help. And we'll talk about that in a bit. I'll actually spawn one here in just a bit so we can add it to our network. I just want to see this ice melt and the water temperature change. So we're getting close. All of this should probably melt around the same time. You'll see these boxes effectively empty. There we go. Produce more water, and look how far down it dropped. We lost about 40 degrees on these tiles right away because these started melting. The duplicants will still want to come in here and run new ice once it empties, so you could also put a door on here or something like that to open and close it so that you don't make this too cold. You can also automate everything in here so that once the water is cold enough, it just drops down into this tank. There's a whole bunch you can do here as far as automation. I'm not going to go ham on that yet. I might save that for another video. But yeah, that's pretty at least straightforward if you know a lot about automation. So I have some videos about that if you're interested. All right, so we're producing colder water. It's getting there. Let's just pretend that we got enough, which will take, again, a handful of cycles, maybe like 10 or so. At least it should hopefully give enough to survive on this water for a little while. Then once that happens, let's just sample this. Let's say we got it down to somewhere really comfortable, like maybe 68. Our ranges for this, you can always click on these plants and see what they want. I would keep it at least like 5 to 10 degrees below the max, just because that's going to serve as good base cooling as well. So let's say we get it down that far. Let's sample this, set it down to like 68 or so, which is about where I like to put it. Sure, 66, whatever. I'm also going to close the upper door so we're not continuing to pour hot water in this, so let's do that. All right, now we have a tank of 66 degree water. This is perfect. This is exactly what we want. So I want to open the door, and this will basically put it into another tank of saying, like, this water is cooled. This is exactly what I need for Bristle Blossoms. So I'm just going to drop it down here, and I'm just going to let it sit so that I can pump it out of this tank with a new pump that I can then just run straight into my blossoms. So let's go ahead and do that. We're again being kind of sloppy about this, but I do want to make sure that I hook it up the correct way so I don't get any like flow confusion. There we go. So now we've got all this nice cold water. You could even put this on a thermosensor if you were worried about it pumping out the right temperature or not. Let's go ahead and hook it up to a power source. And then this is now newly manufactured water that we have made that has been appropriated for these Bristle Blossoms. Once we get it full enough, or once we maybe start pouring in more hot water, we could close this, and we have this amount of water to work with now. But it's going to be consistent, and now we can basically survive if this pool of water were to run out. So let's say this is totally out. Now we at least have a replacement that we can handle new water from. So that's awesome. We did it. We have renewable water for our blossoms, and that's awesome. Let's talk about a couple of other ways this could come in. Let's talk about a polluted water vent. I'm pretty sure there's one on this map, but I think it's way out of the way. We'll just pretend that we found it by deleting some stuff, and we'll build around it. So just go ahead and destroy a bunch of stuff like this. Whatever. Game is definitely chopping because I'm doing so much at the same time. Let's delete this as well. Get out of here, fish. All right. So let's say we happen to find a polluted water vent, which is something that's going to produce polluted water, but it's also going to produce it with a lot of germs, which is what this extra tank is for. I'm also going to hook up bathrooms here in a little bit as well, but this polluted water tank is going to be or this is not going to be a polluted water tank. This is going to be clean water that has germs in it more specifically. The reason I want to separate it from here is because we will use this directly later for oxygen. And we don't want that to have a lot of germs in it. But germs in this water and in this water for our blossoms are totally fine. So let's say we find a polluted water vent. Unfortunately, these are a little bit more rare than I'm letting on. So these might be a little bit more difficult to find. But you also will produce polluted water once you start getting off of outhouses and onto plumbed bathrooms, which we'll do as well. Did I say that already? I don't remember. All right. So we're going to build some tiles around this, very similarly to what we just did for the saltwater geyser. We want a pump in here, and we want some automation via this hydro sensor. We want it to be above 100 kilograms, so there we go. And this will erupt every so often. I'll wait for it to erupt so that we can see what actually comes out. I'm going to hook up some piping here, and this is, once again, you want to store this water somewhere. So you could store it on location like this. You could create another tank, and since we're doing both, I'm just going to do both again. You don't necessarily have to do it this way, but just for the sake of consistency and showing both options, I'm just going to do it that way. All right, so, oh, that was cool. It skipped a spot, but it actually probably should have skipped a spot, so that was pretty nice. All right, so this may be polluted water with a lot of germs. That's what's going to go into this tank, and we'll store it on location as well, just to have some kind of backup. There we go. This is going to come out at 86 degrees, by the way. So this is not super hot. You don't necessarily have to use insulated pipe for this. So it's up to you as to whether you want to do that or not. So I'm going to run it in here like this. and run it out like this. It's going to be routed up to this area, which you don't have to put the outlets on this side, but since we're being consistent, we might as well. So let's run it out of the way a little bit. There we go. Also, this would involve a lot of digging and a lot of building and stuff like that too. I'm glossing over it a lot, so apologies for any of that. We also do need some power. By the way, this is overheating as well because we're sending in water that's way too hot, so you definitely want to build this out of something that can resist it. Definitely something I'm forgetting as I'm speed running. Gold amalgam is a really good deal for most of these things because it can handle stuff that's a lot hotter than most metals. Steel will also work, but again, that's kind of overkill. Let me get this big panel out of the way, by the way. All right, this is about to erupt, and here we go. We have water coming out of here, and this does not let on how many germs are actually in here. It's like in the millions of germs per tile. But this is going to be one of the best water sources in the game, especially for blossoms, because the blossoms don't care if we have germy water in it. You just want to make it separated from any other polluted water that you might find that might be clean, so that you could use that for a more efficient source, like your oxygen. Okay, so let's go ahead and hook up power. Let's pretend that this has been running for a little while and has gotten filled up, so let me go ahead and sample this. It's like infinity billion D germs, so that's right, that's a real number. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. So go ahead and drop this in here. It's going to start pumping out because it detects that there's enough water to start pumping. It's going to flow through all these tanks. These are just for overflow. If we have it hooked up this way, it'll just bypass it if it can possibly send it past. We're going to set up another pump here. And this other pump is going to be running into something that's going to refine our water for germs. So we want to refine polluted water that is germy. So I'm just going to drop it something like this. This is going to run down, can cross along here. It's a little bit messy, but that's okay. Run it in here like that, and have an output that drops right here. Now we need to power this, and we're good. Now we have a second water source, and honestly, between these two water sources, you may be able to live the whole game off of this, depending on how many duplicates you have. I usually shoot for about 15 by the end of the game. You may need one extra water source in addition to these two, but this is pretty solid so far. This is going to produce a lot of water for us, especially if all we're using is for blossoms, and especially if we eventually stop using blossoms, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So, okay, we have two sources here. Let's just mimic this, pretend this is all filled up with stuff like we did before because we want to speed run this. We'll brush this all in. See, we got a whole bunch of polluted water. What will happen is the duplicants will need to run sand up here every once in a while to fill this up. And that's totally fine. And I'll let them do that before we actually move on to the next part. So let me speed run this real fast. By the way, for those of you wondering if you wanted to ever mess around in like sandbox mode, Control U is what makes it speed up really quickly. But there we go. So now we have water being produced that is not polluted, so like regular refined water, but it has a lot of germs in it. These are distinctly separated so that whatever one I have the most of, and I can prioritize one or the other, to drop into this tank, and it really doesn't matter if this has it, because the blossoms just don't care. By the way, look at how cold our water is right now. So if this water starts getting down to this cold, you could also put a door here like I mentioned before so that they stop bringing more ice, and you could just lock it so that nobody could go in or out. There's also, I'm going to say this once again, there's a whole bunch of automation that you could add here to prevent them from going in and out and make this a little bit more elegant. I'm just going to do it the manual, cheap way because this is intended for people that have never done this before. All right, whole bunch of big germy water. Also note that the water that's coming in this side is much, much cooler, and this will mean it's less effort to cool via ice. So this is something that I would prefer to feed to my blossoms if I can get access to some germy source. Like I mentioned before, we want to stay on these outhouses for as long as possible. Eventually our dirt is going to start to waver, which means that we can't grow food, but we also can't really use outhouses either because those rely on dirt. So let's go ahead and replace those with some real bathrooms. None of this fake crap. Alright, so we put up a bathroom. I'm going to start adding all my plumbing here. I'm just going to speed run this pretty quickly. 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe. Maybe not. Let's just do 3. We want to set it up so that the dupes will wash their hands as they exit the bathroom. So I have the sinks at the only entrance and exit point. And I also want to only have them wash it when they leave. So I'm just going to set it like this. As for the actual water sources here, the water that's going to go in, this can be germy. This is fine if this is germy, so that's what I'm going to send in. So I'm going to create a new pump here. It's going to be something like this that just takes clean, germy water. And again, it's funny to say that because germy water is not clean, but you know what I mean. So we're going to send that down in a new pipe. And this is something that I mentioned just a little bit in my water management video. If you ever need to have pipes cross one another, it's often easier just to have it cross multiple lines at a time, like underneath. So I might just do something like this and then rebuild around that. So we know that this is flowing downward, so we want to flow like this. We know this is flowing upward, and then we would just do something like that. Now, as for the polluted water that comes out of here, this is going to be germy polluted water. It's the exact same stuff that we were dealing with before. So I'm going to actually route it the other way, only because this is going to be a little bit easier. Let me get rid of these pipes so that we're not confused. You can route this however you want. This can be kind of a mess of piping, but you'll get the hang of it. So I'm going to route it up the exact same way that I route into anything else. I could route it into backup tanks here, by the way, if I really wanted to, or I could route it straight in. I just know that it wants to go to the same place as all my other germy polluted water so that it eventually winds up in the same area. By the way, something I'm going to mention is that a lot of people talk about creating closed loops for your bathrooms. This kind of does the exact same thing. You don't have to put extra things down there if you don't want to, because effectively the closed loop for this is that we get germy water coming down here, which is coming right now. We send it right back into the place that goes into germy polluted water, and it goes right back into the same tank. So we basically already have an enclosed loop. It's just more centrally managed than managed right here. So I don't know. I think that's a little bit more of like an attention taker than it is a benefit. So I'm going to be a little bit cynical about a lot of things about that. So if this is the first time watching some of my tutorials, then I guess be prepared for that kind of stuff. All right. Let's talk about one more source, and that could be polluted water that is not germy, which is amazing, by the way, but you do need to find a way to deal with it. So what I would do, and this is something that you can manage in a whole bunch of different ways, the type of geyser you might want to look for is called a cool slush geyser. So let me spawn one of those. There we go. The cool slush geyser is amazing because it can do two things. One, it produces water for you, which is obviously very important, but two, it produces it so cold, 14 degrees Fahrenheit. This is like minus 10 Celsius. It produces it so cold that you could actually use some of this to start cooling some of this water. So that can be very handy. You also will probably want to cool it because if you don't, you will start freezing ice over here and breaking your pipes. So you probably should find a way to cool it, and this will be a little bit of a different setup, by the way. So what I would do with this is I would probably drop something like that. Do something like this. I would also... Oh, I need to wire these up really quickly. I would also store this on location, or maybe have some kind of central storage point for it. This is specifically for very cold, polluted water. So we'll do something like that. We'll set up some pipes. We'll route this back out. And then what I would do is I would probably use this to cool the water here, so I don't necessarily need ice. You can also cool it for anything else on your base. So if you have a place that's producing a lot of heat, say like a big power production room that could produce a lot of heat, or a place where you're producing steel or glass or something like that, you could use this water to cool that area down, which you need to cool it first before you can actually refine it. But the cooling on here is so powerful to the point that this is probably one of the best vents in the whole game. Or geysers, or whatever else you want to call them. So yeah, I would definitely be very, very excited about getting one of these and finding a way to refine it. So for actually cooling the stuff down, the best thing to do, in my opinion, is to do something like this, where you run pipe in, and then you can just run radiant pipe all the way through here, if you have enough refined metal. This will cool it down as much as you can possibly do. I'm also going to talk about this a lot in other videos, so if you've seen this before, I apologize, but you want to have this on some kind of shutoff so that you make sure this water is cold enough or warm enough before you pump it back out. So what I would do is probably have... You don't also need to put this much pipe here, by the way, so let's just make it a little bit more simple for the sake of convenience. I'm going to leave a little bit of pipe hanging. This will be a little bit messy. So I'm going to just route it down up there and then right here. So that if I detect any water that is not cooled enough, I will hold on to it until it does cool, or does warm, that is. So what I would want to do in this case is I would want to say, okay, is this actually allowed to pass? Let's set up some automation here that is not in this category because I'm in the wrong place. a liquid pipe thermosensor. We want to make sure that this is cold enough, or rather warm enough, before this leaves the room. And then once it goes out of the liquid shutoff, it's just going to go back into a new tank that we create. So again, you want to create another tank where you can store it on location. I'm just going to create some of these. Nah, we might as well be consistent. What am I doing? We're just going to eat up into this biome a little bit, even though I wouldn't want to do this normally. But, you know, making a mess because we're trying to do things fast. This is like cutting out a picture in Photoshop, where you have to cut out really finely and then you can cut out bigger afterward. Did not mean to do that. We are misclicking. We are having a hell of a time. All right, here we go. All right, then we'll drop it off somewhere here. Have the exact same type of idea. And we'll go ahead and route this up. So now we need wire here, which we deleted. And we need a place for this to actually go. We also want to make sure to set this correctly. I only want to pump this out if this is above like 33 degrees Fahrenheit. Just above freezing so that it doesn't create ice when we go and refine it. By the way, I'm pointing to this. This is not where we're going to refine it. I'll build it there in just a second. So we want to route this up. This is where you can start getting a little bit of a boondoggle of pipes. Just kind of do your best to manage it. And yes, boondoggle. Did anybody do those when they were a kid? I definitely did some of those, and I was obsessed with them for like maybe a couple weeks, and I think I never did them again. All right, so we're going to drop it into a pipe or a pit here. You could, again, just store it in more of these reservoirs if you wanted to, but, you know, consistency. That's what we like. All right, this should erupt soon. I'll just put this on super speed until it does. This is overheating again. It's probably because I don't have a lot of cooling here, and there's not much oxygen, so this is actually a little bit of a red herring. This should be okay. Let me just fill this up with oxygen that's a little bit more sustainable. This is because we're speedrunning and we don't have a lot. But this is also a good example of some stuff produces heat, and you could use this to cool it down. So definitely a very good idea there. There we go. It's cooling down now that we have more oxygen around it, so we should be fine. But this is a concern. You definitely need to cool this stuff. All right, let's speedrun this really fast. Let me make sure I haven't skipped anything here. I don't think so. We're getting pretty close to wrapping this up. But so what we've got is we've got 14-degree polluted water coming out of here, which is definitely very, very valuable. And we're just going to go ahead and sample this and pretend we got a whole bunch of it like we did before. Let's do this. Brush it in with our handy-dandy cheater tools. Hook this up to power. And there we go. So now we've got it coming in here, but we don't actually have anywhere for this to go. So we need a separate place to refine this, because this is going to be germy, this is going to not be germy, and we don't want to cross those lines. So let's go ahead and route this down. Again, this is going to be kind of a disaster in terms of piping, but just do your best. It's also good to plan out how your dupes are going to get in and out of these rooms. So you might not want to stack them all on top of each other like this. Or at least have like doors or ladders or something that you could use to maintain it, because sometimes you will need to get in and out of there. So that building style is probably not the greatest, but we're just kind of stuck on space. This is also another reason why these liquid reservoirs are good, because you can still dig around and move stuff around in here without worrying about a flood. So there we go. And then we will have our own separate drop-off point. You could mix them together if you really wanted to, but I'll just keep them separated. And there we go. Now we just need salt, or not salt. That'd be awesome if it was salt, but we need sand. And I think we set this up wrong. There we go. So the whole aim here is that with the cool polluted water, it's going to pump up here. It will flow through here, and we'll see the temperature change. Right now it's at 16 because it's warming up already, but it should warm up really fast once it gets in here. And this is just exchanging its temperature with all this stuff down here, so that you need less ice to maintain this, and to the point where you might not even need any ice at all. So we're sharing all of the coolness from this polluted water with the water that we want to cool. And it's coming up here, and this is detecting if the water is cold enough, and if it is, or sorry, warm enough. I keep messing this up. If the water is warm enough, we will activate this shutoff. It will flow straight through, all the way up until it drops off at this point here, which we'll see it coming up. And once it comes up there, it will drop into a pump. The pump will go down into a separate water sieve and into our pool of water that should not have any germs in it. This may have some because there's some germs being produced by this polluted dirt, but the water shouldn't. I don't think that air to liquid transfer is really a thing in terms of germs, by the way. So once we got this all closed off, oh, we need power. Let's again just pretend that we have enough here, so let's go ahead and brush a bunch in so that we can see this whole thing operating all at once. And this will close the thread on most of what we want to do. We still have one more thing to do, and that is that while all this is going on, we're still eating up our algae. So we still need to be digging around for algae, making sure we have enough for oxygen, but the algae is a non-renewable resource at this point. Oh, we messed up. This is not polluted water at the right temperature. We need to make sure this is the right temperature, and that was the whole point of this guard. Otherwise, this is exactly what's going to happen. You're just going to break your pipes and you're going to freeze stuff. So let's sample this. Let's turn up the temperature to maybe 40, which is where it would be after it left that room anyway. We'll stop messing this up. But yeah, here you go. My duplicants will eventually fix this. They'll eventually clear out all this excess stuff, but this might be broken for a little bit. But let's just pretend that we didn't cheat and we did it right the first way. Yeah, let's move on. So, the last thing, like I was talking about just a second ago, is you're going to run out of algae, which means that you need renewable oxygen. And your solution for most renewable oxygen is going to be an electrolyzer setup. I'm not going to go too far into detail on how to set these up correctly, but this is something that you definitely want to mimic by a certain point in the game and have at least an answer for, because that's going to be your last step to being sustainable in the long term. And it's all dependent on water. And we'll get there. So the basics of an electrolyzer setup is you're going to need 2 effective chambers. And I'm going to be kind of sloppy about this. This might not be a great setup, but it'll kind of get the point across. I'm just estimating on my space here. So what you're going to need for an electrolyzer setup is you're going to need to start with a pool of cool polluted water. And this is, again, another solution that could be used for this geyser here. There are also a bunch of other cooling solutions that you could use to make your own cool polluted water. But yeah, that's effectively what you want to do. An electrolyzer setup is going to look something like this. And again, I'm just going to be kind of haphazard about this. We're going to drop a couple of gas pumps at the bottom. That's going to be to pump out the oxygen. Some airflow tiles. We're going to grab a electrolyzer. We're going to just build a little bit of a thing to manually separate the 2 gases to go to different sources. So this will mostly be hydrogen, or all hydrogen eventually. And then we had a mix-up here because we need to build an extra space, and there we go. It's going to look something like this. Maybe not exactly like this. Probably a more efficient way to do it. I'm just kind of approximating. There's more exact ways to do it, and plenty of other videos out there. This is not something I have labbed too much. But it's going to look something like this. The only point is that you need clean water without any germs. So that's going to be your last source to drop in here. So I'm going to drop a pump here. This is going to be for clean, non-germy water. That's going to be for our oxygen generation. We'll just run a pipe down there real fast. This could also be hot water, by the way, so we might want to use insulated pipes. Let's go ahead and switch to that. There we go. Run this down and eventually feed this in. Whoops. We're making mistakes all over the place. I'm so embarrassed. All right. So now we have all of our sources hooked up. Let me just hook up power here really fast. The last things you'll need to do is obviously hook up some ventilation. What's going to come out of this is going to be pretty hot oxygen. So by the way, you will want to probably build all this stuff out of gold, which we are totally not doing, so that it can resist the heat. But you shouldn't need any separate cooling to keep all this machinery cold, because the oxygen that's continually being produced should be at a pretty set temperature. So you shouldn't need to worry about that too much. So what you want to do is hook up something like this. This will eventually run through your cold water to eventually be cooled and blown out into your base, so you're not blowing out like 150-degree oxygen. And there you go. And we'll have this all set up here in just a second. I'm just going to put this on a regular vent and put an electrolyzer in there, obviously. Make sure it's being built out of the right thing. Gold amalgam. Then we just need power real fast. Let's hook this up. There we go. And we want this to only turn on above a certain threshold. Let's just say 500 for right now. Again, I have not labbed this too much, but I've had some success with those numbers. The gas pipes that you want to take out of the top here is going to be for only hydrogen, so you can actually produce power from this if you want to, which I'll just throw together really fast. I think it's here. I don't remember for sure. Nope, off by one. and then this can hook into your normal power grid. So you're going to have something like this, but the point is that you're going to be expending water to do this, and we need to hook up power here, and once we have that, we will be fully sustainable on water for our food and for our oxygen. So we're shaping up here. Polluted water, very cold, no germs. Polluted water with germs, salt water, all being turned into the different types of waters that you will need. Germy water for your bathrooms, not germy water for your oxygen. Cold water, doesn't matter on germs, for your blossoms. So we have effectively a full setup going here, and by the way, we are producing oxygen now. The oxygen should not have any germs, but I don't know where this is coming from. Saying that we have it, it's probably already out here, so that's probably what it is. But yeah, so we have oxygen being produced. There may be some oxygen that gets caught up in here, by the way, so it might damage this a little bit. We have oxygen being produced, and we're now producing off of this, which means that we can effectively get rid of anything that was using algae. So if we time this all correctly, we should still have a little bit of algae, we should still have a little bit of dirt, but now we're getting all of our oxygen and all of our food from water that is renewable. So we've set up the whole thing. One last thing you can do is I would advise you to eventually get off of these blossoms. And the reason why is twofold. One, it's because this is a constant water tax. But two, there are better food qualities out there for other things. I would really recommend ranching. So I just put out a tutorial about this just a little bit ago, so you can check that out if you need to know more about ranching. But the basic idea is that you will capture critters from around the map. You will groom them, they will produce a lot of eggs, and then you will kill the stuff that comes out of the eggs to make food for you. Sounds pretty brutal, but that's kind of because it is. So we'll go ahead and just drop some critters in here. I'll set this up for, I guess, hatches. Let's do like... This is a pretty small room, by the way. I wouldn't normally set this up this way. I'm just kind of speed running. So we'll go ahead and drop in a few hatches. Like so. And then you'll need... What the... You'll need duplicants that can actually handle this, so let's get a couple of duplicants that have the ranching ability. And once they come up here, they'll groom these. You can set up a whole system to create eggs and create meat and kill them automatically, which will eventually get you off of these blossoms, which means that all you'll be doing is ranching. Ranching has a lot of other benefits. Let's talk about one more thing before we call this thing good. Let's kind of advance to the later stages of the game artificially by saying, like, we've explored a whole bunch of the map. We've started to hit the bottom of the map, which is going to be where this is critical, and kind of how to manage water flow, which is honestly probably something I should have covered a little bit earlier, but, you know, I didn't do that. Eventually, what is going to happen is you're going to start hitting the bottom of the map. And what I typically do is I will have big, long ladders that lead all the way down so that the travel time from the top to bottom is minimized as much as possible. So I'll do something like this. Let me actually just destroy whatever's in here. What that will do is that we'll create a really long chamber that leads all the way down to the abyssalite that's right before the entrance to the oil biome. You will eventually need to get oil, but what this is going to have a side benefit of, and this is going to collect a lot of water from around the map and allow it to all kind of flow into one place. At this point, this is going to be a very mixed source of water, so I would definitely have some kind of filtration method if you want to pump this back into your water network. This can sustain you for a little while, but it also makes digging a little bit more convenient. If you can dig around and you can go ahead and do something like this and just have it flow into the same pool, you could grab water from here, you could, you know, build some ladders up here and dig it out like that, have it start flowing down. You'll eventually collect a lot of water just by opening up different parts of the map. You could even do it for this ice biome if it will slowly melt. Do something like this, so that that'll eventually flow into here. And you'll eventually collect like a huge pool of water at the bottom. This can be really useful for a lot of things, and this can also be very useful if you're struggling capturing a bunch of sources like this. Because I'm kind of trivializing how common these sources are and how easy they are to get. So if you're having problems getting to that point, I would recommend digging in a fashion like this and trying to unite all these random pools of water into one big one at the bottom of the map. So you could just do stuff like this. As long as it all flows there, that'll be great. Another point of management that you can do is this will leave a lot of like random water around. So if you set up these mopping jobs, oh, it's doing it instantly. But if you set up some of these mopping jobs, you want to set up some bottle emptiers and just have them take water there that you don't really have a need for. So if you find any polluted water or any salt water or anything like that, you could just set it up like this and then your dupes will eventually go get it. Let's just do this for the sake of whatever. Let's mop this up. There we go. So I might need to go mop all this stuff. They might be a little bit inconvenienced, but if we find anything that's in a bottle, we can just say, all right, if you find it, just bring it here. And they'll eventually empty it down into the same pit. So this pit will just continuously grow. And if you wanted to set up some kind of filtration system, you could put a... Why can't I place this? Oh, because I turned this off. Lol. There's also a bunch of plants in the way. If you want to place this, you can do something like this. And then the water filtration system, there's a couple of different options you can use. I would definitely recommend using something that's a little bit more power not intensive, I guess. Oh, I'm like ruining a bunch of our piping. But what I would do is we could have a whole bunch of different types of water coming through this, right? So I would run this up something like this, and I would try to drop it off at the places that it's supposed to go via these vents. You can also use filtration like this. These are very expensive to filter out different types of water and kind of send them to the different places that you want them to go. But that's the most foolproof way to do it. You could also use shutoffs, which I will just quickly build. So let's say we want to do something like this to go here for any germy polluted water. That we don't know if it could have germs in it or not, so we'll just leave it like that. This could be for anything else. This could be for regular water. And I'm being very messy about this just for the sake of speed, so I apologize for that. Let's dig a bunch of this out. Alright, then we'll have a pipe that runs up here, intersecting all of these. This will be kind of like my overflow. I'll find something to do with this. Maybe you could just dump it back out into the pool if it is overflowing. Or you could set up some automation to not let it pass unless you know exactly what it is. So yeah, this is the one downside of these guys, is that if they ever do get backed up, you will get stuff going to the wrong places. So just kind of be wary about using those. But assuming all this was hooked up the best it could possibly get hooked up, and I'm probably not going to do it all the way, just for the sake of time, I'd have this one filtering for regular water, and we don't know if it'll have germs in it or not, so I'm going to send it to my germy tank just to be safe. So I want to grab one of these, this element sensor for a pipe, and put the one in front of each of them. I'm going to hook up an automation wire on each of them so that they know what they're controlling, so that if I were to find the types of water that I wanted in each of these, then they will go to the correct places. We'll hook this all up and set it correctly in just a sec. Getting some stuff set here. Need a bridge that's going to go this way. There we go. Drop it off. And this one's going to go over here. Something like that. Whoops. All right, and then what we want to set here is this one's going to lead to regular water, so I want to filter for regular water. There we go. This one's going to filter for salt water, so I want to filter for that. And this one's going to filter for polluted water, so I'm going to filter for that. And there we go. We have a full setup for this. The piping is not going to work because it's annoying stuff. And I feel really obligated to make sure this is actually working the way we intend, so we might as well do that really fast. Another way you could do this, by the way, instead of having something like this, and I know people are going to comment on this, is that you could just run this straight through these lines and have the automation connected to these vents. The reason I would say to potentially do it with these shutoffs is because you could store this in extra tanks just to make sure you're actually getting out of it what you really need. So yeah, you can do those either way. You could filter it this way, or you could just hook up a sensor like here and just run the pipes straight through all these drop-off points. That can be a little bit messier to deal with, though. These don't consume a ton of power. I've always liked this a little bit better. It's a little bit more readable for me. And it makes it clear to a newer player, I think. So, yeah, you can do it either way. So, we have all that set up. Let's see if we need to run power down there. And that will basically complete our water network once we get this done. Run this up. I'm being very sloppy. That's okay. There we go. I don't know if this has enough, but that should be okay. All right, and now we're pumping random stuff up here. There should also be an overflow where you should catch stuff, because there could be oil down there. There could be petroleum, or not petroleum. There could be ethanol down there. So if that happens, you might want to catch it and some extra things here and kind of keep an eye on it. Maybe route those to other places depending on what it is. But yeah, that's effectively what it would look like. And then I'll just super speed this really fast for the sake of us getting an example going. So this is pumping mostly salt water right now because that's what got there first. But eventually it could pump all this other stuff. It could pump polluted water, and you can see some of this does actually have germs in it. So that's why we are defaulting to it going to the germy sources rather than to the clean sources, because we just can't guarantee that. We disrupted our bridges! There we go, super speed. And now we're getting the filtration that we want. This should be detecting for salt water. I don't know why it's not. So this is definitely going to the wrong... Oh, this is just regular water. Duh. So here we go. We're going to the right place. Now we have salt water that's being pumped in from the bottom of the map that were just from these random sources. So there you go. This is basically all of the water sources that you're going to get. There's a couple of other random ones. There's a bunch of other different vents. I am going to touch on this really fast and say that the reason that I didn't capture this right away is because this is steam still. You need some way to cool this. And again, we do have a cooling solution here for at least some small things. So you could use this to cool it if you really wanted to. Or you could use some other cooling method that would generate all of this polluted cold water. So yeah, you could capture these. I would say in the order of the priorities of things that are best for this, it's probably the cool slush geyser first because it has a lot of other things. The polluted water is probably next because this produces a lot, and this is something that you can get access to, and your blossoms will not care. I'm going to, by the way, open this back up to dump some more water in there because we're getting a little bit low. The next I would probably say is the regular water geyser, which we did not find. It just puts out regular water, kind of similar to this, but comes out very hot, very similar to the saltwater geyser. Saltwater, I would say, is after that. Then I would say whatever collected water you get is probably good. Just the filtration is kind of annoying on that. Then I think cool steam vents and regular steam vents would be your last two sources. These are something that I really just don't like to play around with that much. And especially with more moderately sized colonies, I just don't think it's worthwhile. So that's it. That's everything that I had on my list about water management. We kind of sped run through and we kind of kept it on a map that would look normal for a regular run. This is very important to time out based upon what you're doing throughout the game, so I hope that the example inside of a real run was pretty helpful. And I hope this is all pretty straightforward. There's a bunch of different ways to do this, by the way, so you don't have to do it exactly this way. But yeah, let me know if you guys have any questions about this, have any comments. Like I said, this was something that I died to constantly when I was a new player, so hopefully this helps you get over that gap of about cycle 100, 200, somewhere around there, where you need to have this kind of water management system before you can continue to sustain. But yeah, that's all I have. Leave any comments down below. I'll have a lot more content coming up here very soon. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you guys really soon in another video.